My name is Carolina, and at 67 years old, I never thought I would attend my own funeral rehearsal. The terminal diagnosis gave me 6 months, but it gave my daughter-in-law, Audrey, something else entirely opportunity. I watched her dabbing fake tears as she spoke about her loving mother-in-law. If only they knew what she had done, what she was still doing. I may be dying, but I had prepared something special for my actual funeral. If you are watching this from a place where family secrets have hurt you too, drop a heart in the comments. Subscribe to join others who have learned that sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways. Now let me show you how I turned my ending into her beginning. Before all this darkness entered my life, I was just Carolina Bennett, a retired school teacher who had spent 35 years teaching third graders in Westbrook, Maine. My husband George passed away 8 years ago after 40 wonderful years of marriage. We had one son, Thomas, who was the light of our lives. Thomas and I had always been close, especially after his father died. He would visit me every Sunday, help around the house, and we would have our special movie nights, where we would watch old classics and eat my homemade apple pie. Everything changed when Thomas met Audrey 4 years ago. At first I was thrilled. Audrey seemed charming, intelligent, and appeared to genuinely care for my son. She was a pharmaceutical sales representative with a dazzling smile and impeccable manners. When they got married 3 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with open arms. I even gave them George's and my wedding rings to use in their ceremony, a family tradition I had hoped to continue. The first year was wonderful. Audrey would visit with Thomas, sometimes even stopping by on her own to check on me. She would bring groceries, help with house chores, and listen to my old stories with what I thought was genuine interest. She called me Mom and seemed to fill a void in our small family. Last winter, I received the news that changed everything. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer, terminal. The doctors gave me 6 to 8 months. I decided to handle my end-of-life matters myself, to spare Thomas the burden. I had always been independent, and I wanted to maintain that dignity even in my final chapter. I started planning, organizing my finances, creating a will, and even pre-planning my funeral. Thomas was devastated by the news, of course, but I assured him I had accepted my fate and wanted to make the most of the time I had left. That is when I began noticing the changes in Audrey. Her visits became more frequent, but different. She started asking about my financial situation, my insurance policies, the house deed. She would casually bring up my will, asking if everything was in order and if I had considered updating it since my diagnosis. After her visits, I noticed small things missing from my home. First, it was just a silver frame with a photo of George. Then, my grandmother's pearl earrings disappeared. When I mentioned these things to Thomas, he gently suggested that perhaps I had misplaced them due to my medication. I began to doubt myself. The phone calls started next. I would receive calls confirming cancellations of doctor appointments I had never canceled. My regular pharmacy called once to verify a change in medication I had never requested. And one afternoon, a real estate agent called, asking to schedule a time to evaluate my house for listing, saying she had been contacted by my daughter-in-law. During one of my hospital stays, a night nurse named Sarah seemed concerned. While checking my vitals, she leaned in close and whispered, "Have you been feeling worse after taking your home medications?" The question seemed odd, but something in her eyes made me pause. She suggested I might want to keep track of when I take my medications and who gives them to me. At the time, I dismissed it as an overly cautious medical professional, but her words planted a seed. As my health began to deteriorate more rapidly than the doctors had predicted, my suspicions grew. I noticed that I would feel particularly ill after Audrey brought me her special homemade soups or teas. The room would spin, my vision would blur, and the next day I could barely remember what had happened. That is when I conceived of the unusual idea I would plan a funeral rehearsal. I presented it to Thomas and Audrey as a celebration of life planning session. I told them I wanted to make sure everything would be as I wished and that it would help me find closure. Thomas thought it was morbid, but agreed when I insisted it would give me peace. Audrey surprisingly seemed enthusiastic about the idea. I arranged for the funeral home to set everything up exactly as it would be for the real event. The casket would be there but empty. Photos of me throughout my life would be displayed. Friends and family would be invited to practice their eulogies, and I would be there watching, listening, learning who truly mourned me and who might be waiting for me to be gone. Little did they know this was not just a rehearsal for my departure. It was the beginning of my investigation into what I was starting to suspect was not a natural decline, but something far more sinister. As a teacher, I had learned to observe carefully, and now those skills would serve me in uncovering a truth no one wanted to see. The day of my funeral rehearsal arrived on a dreary Saturday in April. The somber mood matched the overcast sky as friends and family awkwardly gathered at Pinewood Funeral Home. I had requested to be seated in the back, explaining that I wanted to observe the proceedings as if I were looking down from above. Everyone respected my wishes, though many cast concerned glances my way, clearly uncomfortable with my presence at my own memorial service. Thomas arrived looking tired, and drawn his eyes reddened either from lack of sleep or tears, I could not tell which. But it was Audrey who commanded my attention. She arrived dressed impeccably in a modest black dress, her makeup subtle yet flawless, giving the perfect impression of dignified grief. She carried a handkerchief, which she occasionally dabbed at her eyes, though I noticed they remained perfectly dry. The funeral director, Mr. Harmon, began the service with a brief introduction about the unusual nature of our gathering. Then, one by one, friends and former colleagues came forward to speak about me. Their words were genuine, filled with fond memories and sincere emotion. My old teaching partner, Judith, could barely make it through her speech without breaking down. These moments warmed my heart, reminding me that my life had indeed touched others. When it was Audrey's turn to speak, I watched with intense focus. She approached the podium with measured steps, her posture perfectly balanced between strength and sorrow. Carolina was not just a mother-in-law to me, but the mother I never had. She began, her voice catching just enough to sound affected. Her love for Thomas and for me was boundless. She welcomed me into her family with open arms and taught me what it means to be part of a loving family. Her performance was flawless, so much so that several attendees nodded in appreciation of her heartfelt words. But I knew better. This was the same woman who had complained to Thomas just last week that my medical appointments were becoming burdensome and suggested placing me in a care facility against my wishes. As the service concluded and people moved to the reception area for refreshments, I remained seated observing. Thomas was immediately surrounded by well-wishers while Audrey circulated the room with practiced grace. I noticed her stop to speak with a man I did not recognize. Curious, I moved closer, pretending to admire a floral arrangement within earshot. "So we are still on track for the listing next month?" the man asked quietly. "Absolutely," Audrey replied, lowering her voice. "Carolina's condition is deteriorating quickly. The doctor says it could be any week now. I want to have everything ready to move as soon as possible after she passes. The housing market is hot right now, and that neighborhood is prime real estate." I felt my heart constrict. They were discussing selling my home, the home where I had lived with George for 4 decades, raised Thomas, and hoped to spend my final days. And they were discussing it at my funeral rehearsal. When we returned home that evening, I noticed how distant Thomas had become. Once we would have talked for hours after such an emotional day, but now he retreated to the guest bedroom soon after dinner, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Audrey had insisted on staying the night to help care for me, an offer that now filled me with dread rather than gratitude. That night I awoke to the sound of someone in my bathroom. Through barely opened eyes, I saw Audrey's silhouette against the dim nightlight. She was at my medicine cabinet handling my prescription bottles. I kept my breathing steady, feigning sleep as she methodically opened several bottles, seemed to adjust their contents, and carefully replace them. The next morning, I called my friend Patricia, who had worked as a pharmacist before retiring. I asked her to stop by for coffee, bringing her reading glasses. When Audrey left to run errands, Patricia arrived and I showed her my medications. "These pills do not match the prescription, Carolina," she said with concern after examining several bottles. "This one should be round and white, but these are oblong and have a different imprint code. And this dosage seems altered," she added, showing me how the numbers had been carefully modified on the label. "I hope you're satisfied," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You've destroyed my life, taken my child, turned my husband against me. Was it worth it, Mother? Does it feel good to win?" As the weeks passed, I noticed a pattern. Whenever Audrey prepared meals for me, my symptoms worsened dramatically. I would experience intense nausea, dizziness, confusion, and sometimes could not recall entire days. During one particularly bad episode, Thomas called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor seemed puzzled by my symptoms, noting they did not align with the typical progression of pancreatic cancer. A young home health aide named Marcus, who visited twice weekly to help with my basic care, pulled me aside one day while Audrey was on a phone call in the other room. "Mrs. Bennett, I do not want to overstep, but something does not seem right here," he whispered. "Your daughter-in-law, she asks a lot of questions about your medication schedule and when you will be alone. And she asked me not to document some of your symptoms in my official reports." My suspicions deepened further when I received a call from my local pharmacy. They wanted to confirm that Audrey had permission to pick up my prescriptions. I had never given such permission and told them so. The pharmacist sounded concerned and informed me that Audrey had been collecting my medications for the past 3 months, always claiming I was too ill to come myself. The most heartbreaking realization came when I reviewed the first footage. Not only did it show Audrey tampering with my food and medication, but it also captured a conversation between her and Thomas in my kitchen. "I am worried about your mother," Audrey said, her voice dripping with false concern. "The doctor mentioned she might start experiencing confusion and paranoia as her condition progresses. If she says anything unusual or makes any accusations, remember, it is just the disease and medications talking." Thomas nodded, looking exhausted and defeated. "I know," he replied. "It is just so hard seeing her like this. I almost wish it would be over quicker for her sake. The suffering is unbearable to watch." Audrey embraced him, her back to the camera, but I could see her face over his shoulder. The mask of sympathy slipped for just a moment, revealing a cold, calculating expression that sent shivers down my spine. My own son, my Thomas, was being manipulated into dismissing anything I might say against his wife. The isolation I felt in that moment was more painful than any physical symptom I had endured. The video evidence I collected over the next 2 weeks confirmed my worst fears. On 3 separate occasions, I watched in horror as Audrey systematically added unidentified powders to my food when she thought no one was looking. She would carefully stir them into my tea, sprinkle them over my soup, and even inject something into my fruit with a small syringe. Her methodical approach was terrifying, each action performed with practiced precision. I knew I needed professional confirmation of what was happening. Using the pretense of wanting a second opinion on my cancer treatment, I secretly visited Dr. Eleanor Winters, an oncologist in a neighboring town whom Audrey knew nothing about. I brought samples of my food and medication, along with a week's worth of my own blood samples that I had collected with Marcus's discreet help. Dr. Winters looked grave as she reviewed my medical history and examined the samples. The test results came back 3 days later, confirming what I had suspected. My system showed elevated levels of several compounds, including arsenic and digitalis, that should not have been present. More alarmingly, they were being administered in small, consistent doses, designed to mimic the natural deterioration of someone with terminal cancer. With trembling hands, I also found myself going through financial statements I had not reviewed in months. What I discovered made me physically ill. Nearly $40,000 had been transferred from my accounts to an unfamiliar offshore account in small regular amounts that would not trigger bank alerts. Audrey, who had offered to help manage my finances during my illness, had access to all my passwords and accounts. She had been systematically stealing from me while slowly poisoning me to death. The deeper I dug, the more evidence I uncovered. On my home computer, I found emails in the trash folder showing that Audrey had been corresponding with real estate agents about selling my house immediately after my death. There were also browsing searches for new luxury cars and vacation properties, all researched on days when she was supposedly caring for me. My investigation took another turn when I discovered that Thomas and I were no longer receiving invitations to family gatherings. Confused, I called my cousin Beth, with whom I had always been close. "We assumed you were too ill for visitors, Carolina," she explained hesitantly. "Audrey told us your immune system was compromised and that you could not risk any exposure to outside germs. She said you could not even talk on the phone for more than a minute or two because it exhausted you." Similar conversations with other friends revealed that Audrey had been systematically cutting me off from my support network, creating a narrative of an invalid too sick to maintain contact with the outside world. Some friends admitted they had tried to visit but were turned away at the door by Audrey, who claimed I was sleeping or too weak for company. The most disturbing discovery came when Harold used his connections to run a background check on Audrey. What he found stunned me. This was not her first marriage. She had been married once before to a wealthy older man whose mother had lived with them. The mother-in-law had died under mysterious circumstances, officially ruled as natural causes exacerbated by dementia. Shortly after her death, Audrey had divorced her husband, walking away with a substantial settlement. The pattern was too similar to be coincidental. Despite mounting evidence, I knew that confronting Thomas would be futile. Audrey had spent months conditioning him to see me as a confused, paranoid old woman. Any accusations I made would simply reinforce the narrative she had carefully constructed. Still, I had to try. I chose a rare moment when Thomas visited me alone. Audrey had a work commitment she could not reschedule, giving me a precious window of opportunity. "Thomas, sweetheart, I need to tell you something important." I began, keeping my voice steady. "I have reason to believe Audrey may be harming me intentionally." His reaction was exactly as I had feared. His face immediately closed off, his expression shifting from concern to pain tolerance. "Mom, we talked about this. The doctor warned us you might experience paranoia as your condition progresses," he said gently, taking my hand. "Audrey loves you. She spends more time caring for you than anyone. These accusations are hurtful and unfair." I tried showing him the financial statements, but he dismissed them, explaining that Audrey had merely been consolidating accounts to simplify estate management after my passing a decision. He claimed we had all discussed, though I had no recollection of such a conversation. By the time he left that evening, the gulf between us felt insurmountable. As his car pulled out of the driveway, I watched from the window, tears streaming down my face. The son I had raised, the person who knew me better than anyone in the world, now looked at me with doubt in his eyes. Audrey's manipulation had been complete. The isolation deepened in the following weeks. My closest friends began to distance themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they perceived as my declining mental state. When I tried to share my suspicions with my oldest friend Judith, she listened politely, but later called Thomas concerned about my mental health. I overheard him assuring her that the doctor had warned about possible paranoid delusions, and they were doing their best to keep me comfortable. As my social circle shrank, my physical health deteriorated rapidly. Whatever Audrey was giving me was working with frightening efficiency. Some days I could barely get out of bed, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. My thinking became foggy, my words slurred. I began to fear that she would succeed before I could expose her. In my darkest moments alone in my bedroom with only the silent cameras as witnesses, I wondered if I was fighting a losing battle. Maybe it would be easier to surrender, to let go, to slip away as Audrey planned. But then I would look at the photo of George on my nightstand, his kind eyes seeming to urge me on, and I knew I could not give up. If not for myself, then for justice for Thomas, who deserved to know the truth about the woman he had married. The pain of betrayal cut deeper than any physical agony. Each time I saw Thomas and Audrey together, his arm protectively around her shoulders, as she played the role of devoted caregiver, I felt a fresh wave of heartbreak. This woman had not only plotted my death, but had stolen my son's trust in the process. The thought that she might succeed, that I might die with this secret, became my greatest fear. Yet even as my body weakened, my resolve strengthened. I might be dying, but I would not go quietly. I would not let Audrey bury her crimes along with me. Somehow I would find a way to expose the truth, even if I did not live to see justice served. The dead might not be able to speak, but I would leave behind a voice that could not be silenced. The true extent of Audrey's malevolence revealed itself on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in late May. Thomas was away on an overnight business trip, and Audrey had volunteered to stay with me, claiming concern about leaving me alone. I had pretended to take my sleeping pills after dinner, but secretly disposed of them in the potted plant beside my bed, a trick I had been employing for weeks to maintain some clarity. After Audrey believed I was asleep, I heard her moving around in the guest room. Using all my strength, I quietly made my way down the hallway, my legs trembling with effort. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see her sitting at the small writing desk, scribbling in what appeared to be a journal. When she left to take a shower, I seized the opportunity. The journal was leather-bound and expensive-looking, with her initials embossed in gold on the cover. My hands shook as I opened it, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. The journal contained detailed entries dating back nearly a year long before my cancer diagnosis. The first entries described her growing frustration with her modest lifestyle, despite her and Thomas's comfortable income. She wrote about discovering my savings investments, and the substantial insurance policy George had left me. She calculated the total value of my estate, including the house, at over $2 million. Most chilling were her methodical notes on research she had conducted on undetectable poisons and substances that could mimic natural cancer progression. There were pages of information on arsenic digitalis and various pharmaceutical compounds that could cause organ failure when administered over time. She had even noted optimal dosages based on my weight and existing health conditions. The most recent entry dated just 3 days prior read Carolina looking worse each day. Doctor mentioned liver failing now too. Estimated time remaining 3 to 4 weeks max. Thomas finally discussing funeral arrangements seriously. Need to ensure will is finalized with new amendments redirecting the Vanguard account. Real estate agent confirms house can list immediately after death certificate issued. I carefully photographed several pages with the small camera Harold had provided me before returning the journal exactly as I had found it. Back in my room, I lay awake, my mind racing despite my exhaustion. The evidence was irrefutable now. This was not paranoia or confusion. It was a meticulously planned murder in slow motion. The next morning, Audrey brought me tea and toast as usual, her smile never reaching her eyes. I waited until she sat beside my bed, feigning her usual concern about my comfort. "The tea tastes different today, Audrey," I said carefully, watching her face. "Did you add something to it?" A flicker of alarm crossed her features before she composed herself. "Just honey instead of sugar, Mom. I read that it might be easier on your stomach." I held her gaze steadily. "That is interesting because I found your journal last night while you were showering. I know what you have been doing to me." The transformation was immediate and terrifying. The mask of caring daughter-in-law fell away, replaced by cold, calculating fury. She slowly took the teacup from my hands and placed it on the nightstand. "You should have taken your sleeping pills last night, Carolina," she said, her voice eerily calm. "But it does not matter. No one would believe you anyway. Thomas thinks you are losing your mind, and your doctors expect you to die any day now. Everyone knows terminal patients often become paranoid and confused." "I am not confused about the $40,000 you have stolen from my accounts," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Or the real estate agents you have been talking to about selling my house before I am even cold in my grave." Audrey leaned closer, no longer bothering to hide her contempt. "Do you think Thomas would believe you over me? I have been preparing him for months to expect exactly this kind of paranoid outburst. If you say anything, it will only confirm what he already suspects, that your mind is failing along with your body. Besides," she added with a cruel smile, "you do not have much time left anyway. The damage is already done. Your organs are shutting down one by one." "Is that why you married Thomas?" As a path to my money, I asked, genuinely wanting to understand how someone could be so calculating. Audrey laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Thomas was convenient. Stable job, good benefits, no siblings to complicate inheritance issues, and a wealthy mother with no other heirs. The perfect setup. And he is so trusting, so eager to see the best in people, just like you were." Her words cut deep, confirming my worst fears about her feelings toward my son. She had never loved him. He was simply a means to an end. "You will not get away with this," I said, summoning all my remaining strength. "I have evidence. I have been collecting it for weeks." For a moment, uncertainty flickered in her eyes, but it quickly gave way to dismissive confidence. "No one would believe anything coming from a dying cancer patient with cognitive decline," she said coldly. "Now be a good mother-in-law and drink your tea. It will help ease your discomfort." She stood to leave, pausing at the door. "By the way, I would not bother telling Thomas about our little chat. He has been under so much stress lately. I would hate for him to have to choose between believing his confused, dying mother or his supportive wife who has sacrificed everything to care for you." After she left, I sat frozen in my bed, the untouched tea growing cold beside me. The direct confrontation had accomplished one thing. It had confirmed beyond any doubt that Audrey was fully aware of her actions and their consequences. This was not negligence or misunderstanding, but calculated murder for financial gain. That evening, when Thomas returned, I watched the performance Audrey put on for him, her voice gentle and concerned as she updated him on my condition. He looked at her with such gratitude, such complete trust, that my heart broke all over again. Later, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Thomas sounded defeated, exhausted by grief in anticipation of losing me. "The hospice nurse says we should consider moving her to inpatient care," he said, his voice cracking. "She thinks Mom does not have much time left." Audrey's response was perfectly calibrated, her tone sympathetic yet practical. "We need to do what is best for her, Thomas. If she needs round-the-clock care, maybe the hospice center is the right place. You know we have done everything we can at home." "I know," he sighed. "I just always promised her she could die in her own home." "Sometimes promises have to be broken when circumstances change," Audrey replied smoothly. "Your mother would understand that you are making the best decision for her care." The realization that they were discussing moving me to a facility away from my home, away from any control I still maintained over my situation, sent panic coursing through me. Once institutionalized, I would have no way to protect myself, no way to gather evidence, no way to execute the plan that was slowly forming in my mind. That night, a severe reaction to whatever had been in my dinner sent me into a crisis. My body convulsed with pain, my breathing became labored, and consciousness slipped away from me in waves. Through the fog, I heard Audrey calling 911, her voice convincingly frantic as she reported that I had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The last thing I remember before the ambulance arrived was Audrey leaning over me, checking my pulse, a small smile of satisfaction playing at the corners of her mouth when she thought no one could see. As darkness claimed me, I silently vowed that this would not be the end of my story. Somehow I would find a way to speak from beyond the grave to expose the truth Audrey thought would die with me. The hospital room was eerily quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of machines monitoring my vital signs. I had been admitted to the intensive care unit after what doctors described as multiple organ distress consistent with end-stage cancer. What they did not know was that my condition had been accelerated by months of systematic poisoning. The incident had left me weaker than ever, but it had also created an unexpected opportunity. For the first time in months, I was away from Audrey's constant surveillance, surrounded instead by medical professionals. It was time to put my plan into action. Sarah, the night nurse, who had first planted the seed of suspicion in my mind, was now assigned to my care. When she came to check my vitals in the middle of the night, I gestured for her to come closer. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "I need your help. I think someone is poisoning me." To her credit, Sarah did not dismiss my claim. Instead, she pulled up a chair and listened carefully as I shared my suspicions, the evidence I had gathered, and my fear that time was running out. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Mrs. Bennett, I have worked with terminal patients for 15 years, she finally said. "What you are describing is not normal disease progression, even for aggressive cancer. Your symptoms have been inconsistent, and some of your test results have puzzled the doctors. I think you might be right." Those words, the first validation I had received after months of gaslighting and dismissal, brought tears to my eyes. Sarah squeezed my hand gently. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "First, I need you to help me contact someone without my family knowing," I replied. "My old friend Harold Jenkins. He has been helping me gather evidence." Sarah nodded, her expression resolute. "I will make it happen. But you need to know that if what you are saying is true, this is a criminal matter. We will need to involve the authorities." "I understand," I said. "But we need irrefutable proof first. No one will believe the word of a dying old woman against a seemingly devoted daughter-in-law." Over the next 3 days, with Sarah's help, I executed the first phase of my plan. Harold visited during Thomas and Audrey's brief absences, bringing with him Lawrence Abernathy, a lawyer friend who specialized in elder abuse cases. In the privacy of my hospital room, we reviewed the evidence, the journal photographs, financial records, showing unauthorized transfers, the video footage from my hidden cameras, and the test results from Dr. Forma. Winters confirming the presence of toxic substances in my system. Lawrence looked grave as he examined each piece of evidence. "This is extremely serious, Carolina," he said. "What Audrey has been doing constitutes attempted murder, elder abuse, financial fraud, and several other felonies. We have more than enough to go to the police." "Not yet," I replied firmly. "If we move too soon, she will have explanations ready. She will claim I was confused, that I misinterpreted normal caregiving activities, that the financial transfers were done with my consent for estate planning purposes. We need something irrefutable, something she cannot talk her way out of. That is when I outlined my full plan, a strategy so unexpected that both men stared at me in disbelief. "You want to fake your own death?" Harold asked incredulously. "Carolina, that is extreme and potentially problematic legally." "Not fake it permanently," I clarified. "Just long enough to trap Audrey into revealing herself fully, to make her believe she has won, that her secret is safe." Lawrence frowned, clearly concerned. "Even temporarily, this plan involves medical professionals falsifying records, which crosses ethical and legal lines." "No falsification necessary," I assured him. "My medical condition is genuinely critical. The doctors already believe I could go at any moment. We just need to create a controlled scenario where it appears I have died when in fact I will be moved to a secure location to recover from the poisoning." It took hours of discussion and planning, but eventually, with significant reservations, they agreed to help. The plan required coordination between trusted medical staff, law enforcement officers, briefed on the situation, and a small circle of friends I knew I could trust completely. Over the next week, as my health stabilized somewhat under proper medical care free from Audrey's interference, we set everything in motion. Lawrence helped me create a new will with a trusted executor, which I signed with witnesses present. This document, while seemingly leaving everything to Thomas as expected, contained specific provisions that would activate if evidence of foul play emerged after my death. Harold arranged for the compilation of all video evidence, financial records, and medical reports into a comprehensive file. More importantly, he helped me record a full video testimony, documenting everything I had experienced and discovered about Audrey's systematic attempt to murder me for financial gain. The recording was challenging, requiring multiple sessions as my strength allowed, but the result was powerful, a dying woman's direct accusation from beyond the grave. With the help of a sympathetic detective named Michael Rollins, who had investigated several elder abuse cases and took my claims seriously, we arranged for the evidence to be secured and for police presence to be discreetly arranged at my funeral when the time came. I also wrote personal letters to several key people, Thomas, explaining everything his wife had done and expressing my enduring love despite the pain of his unwitting complicity. Judith, my oldest friend, apologizing for the deception but explaining its necessity. And even one to Audrey herself, a letter I knew would shake her to her core when she realized I had outmaneuvered her. Perhaps the most difficult part of the plan was deciding who to trust with the full truth. Thomas, despite being my only child and the person I loved most in the world, could not know beforehand. His genuine grief would be essential to maintaining the illusion of my death, and more importantly, to drawing out Audrey's true nature at the funeral. A secure room was prepared at a private medical facility under a false name where I would recover from the toxins in my system while the trap was sprung. Dr. Winters, who had confirmed the poisoning, agreed to oversee my care personally. The final piece of the plan was the most audacious. Rather than the traditional photo montage or generic video tribute at my funeral, Harold had helped me create a different kind of memorial video, one that would begin innocuously with photos from my life, but would transition into my recorded testimony, followed by carefully edited clips of the evidence against Audrey. This video, set to play at a specific moment during the service, would be her undoing. As the pieces fell into place, I felt a strange mix of emotions: fear that the plan might fail, sorrow for the pain Thomas would temporarily experience, but most of all, a sense of justice finally within reach. The woman who thought she could silence me forever would discover that some voices cannot be extinguished even by death. The night before the plan was to be executed, Sarah sat with me during her shift, holding my hand as I contemplated what lay ahead. "Are you afraid, Carolina?" she asked gently. I thought for a moment before answering. "Not of dying, if that is what you mean. We all die eventually. But I was afraid of dying with the truth buried alongside me. Of Audrey getting away with murder and possibly harming others in the future. Of Thomas never knowing what kind of woman he married." Sarah nodded in understanding. "You know, in all my years of nursing, I have never met anyone as brave as you," she said. "Most people in your position would have given up." I smiled weakly. When you have been a teacher for 35 years, you learn that sometimes the most important lessons come from standing up to bullies, no matter how powerful they seem. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the hospital window, I was ready. The next time Audrey came to visit, bringing her false sympathy and hidden poisons, she would find not a victim, but a carefully laid trap. She thought I would die with her secret. Instead, I would live long enough to tell the world exactly what she had done. The news of my apparent death spread quickly. According to the official story, I had suffered catastrophic organ failure in the early hours of the morning with only a nurse present at my bedside. By the time Thomas and Audrey arrived at the hospital, they were informed that I had already passed. The death certificate, while not technically falsified, was carefully worded to reflect my genuine medical condition without specifying the true cause. From my secure room at the private medical facility across town, I received updates from Harold and Detective Rollins. Thomas was devastated, they reported, while Audrey performed her role as the grief-stricken daughter-in-law to perfection. She had immediately taken charge of the funeral arrangements, insisting that everything be done according to what she claimed were my wishes. The funeral was scheduled for June 15th, just 5 days after my reported death. This unusually quick timeline was Audrey's doing. She had told Thomas that I had specifically requested no long wait to spare everyone prolonged grief. In reality, as we had discovered from her journal, she was eager to proceed with selling the house and accessing my accounts. On the morning of the funeral, I was too weak to attend in person as we had initially hoped. Instead, Detective Rollins set up a secure video feed that would allow me to witness everything from my hospital bed. Sarah stayed with me, monitoring my condition and providing moral support as we watched the events unfold. Pinewood Funeral Home was filled to capacity. Despite Audrey's efforts to isolate me in my final months, news of my passing had reached former colleagues, students, and friends who came to pay their respects. The large turnout seemed to surprise Audrey, who had expected a smaller, more manageable gathering. Thomas sat in the front row, his face a mask of grief. Beside him, Audrey wore an expensive new black dress, her hand placed supportively on his arm, her expression appropriately somber. My heart ached seeing my son in such pain, knowing that what was to come would initially only deepen his suffering before it could heal him. The service began traditionally enough. The pastor spoke kindly about my life and legacy as a teacher, mother, and friend. Former colleagues shared touching anecdotes about our years working together. A group of former students, now adults with children of their own, spoke about the impact I had made on their lives. Throughout it all, Audrey maintained her composure, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a black handkerchief. Only those of us who knew the truth could see the subtle signs of her impatience, the slight checking of her watch, the calculating gaze as she surveyed the room, perhaps already mentally spending her inheritance. Finally, it was Audrey's turn to speak. She approached the podium with measured steps, adjusting the microphone with manicured fingers that had once measured poison into my food. Carolina was not just my mother-in-law, she began, her voice catching perfectly. She was the mother I never had growing up. From the moment I met her, she welcomed me with open arms into her family, into her heart. As I watched from miles away, I marveled at her performance. The slight tremor in her voice, the careful pauses, the gentle gestures, all calculated to portray the image of a grieving daughter. Carolina taught me what it means to be part of a loving family, Audrey continued. Her generosity, her wisdom, her unconditional love for Thomas and for me were boundless. In these last difficult months, as I cared for her day and night, I came to truly understand the depth of her strength and grace. The audacity of her lies made my blood boil. Sarah squeezed my hand, reminding me to stay calm as we watched the plan unfold. As Carolina requested, Audrey said, gesturing to the large screen behind her, "We have prepared a video celebration of her life. In her final weeks, she helped select the photos and music she wanted to share with you today. This was her final gift to us all, a way to remember the joy she brought to so many lives." With that, she nodded to the funeral director, who dimmed the lights and started the video. The first few minutes proceeded exactly as everyone expected, a montage of photos from my life set to gentle music, images of my childhood, my wedding to George Thomas, as a baby, my years in the classroom, family vacations and holidays. Then abruptly the music faded and the screen went black. There was a moment of confusion in the audience, some murmuring about technical difficulties. Audrey turned to look at the screen, a slight frown marring her perfectly composed expression. My face appeared on screen, pale, but determined, sitting upright in my hospital bed. If you are watching this, I began my voice clear despite my weakness, then I am supposedly dead and you have gathered to mourn me. But before you say your final goodbyes, there is something you need to know. Gasps echoed through the funeral home. Thomas sat up straight, his expression one of shock and disbelief. Audrey froze, her body visibly tensing as she stared at the screen in horror. For the past 6 months, I continued on screen. I have been slowly murdered by my daughter-in-law, Audrey Bennett. This was not the cancer killing me, but systematic poisoning designed to mimic natural disease progression while she stole my money and prepared to inherit my estate. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. On screen, I began methodically presenting the evidence, starting with the financial records showing unauthorized transfers, then moving to the photographs of Audrey's journal, detailing her plans, and finally the most damning evidence of all the video footage from my hidden cameras, showing her adding substances to my food and medication. I watched Audrey's face on the video feed as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. The color drained from her cheeks, her eyes darted frantically around the room, looking for an escape route. Thomas stared at his wife in growing horror, physically moving away from her as the evidence mounted. What you are witnessing is not just elder abuse, my recorded self explained. It is premeditated, attempted murder for financial gain. Everything you are seeing has been provided to the authorities. As if on cue, Detective Rollins and 2 uniformed officers moved toward the front of the room. Audrey, seeing them approach, suddenly sprang into action. She lunged toward the nearest exit, shoving aside an elderly mourner who stood in her path. But she had not counted on the presence of Marcus, my home health aide, who had positioned himself near the door, anticipating this very reaction. As Audrey tried to push past him, he firmly but gently blocked her path, giving the officers time to reach her. "No," Audrey screamed, abandoning all pretense of dignity. "You do not understand. She was dying anyway. I just helped the process along. That ungrateful old woman had everything handed to her while I had to work for every penny." Her confession shouted in panic as the officers handcuffed her echoed through the stunned funeral home. Thomas stood frozen, his face, a mask of incomprehension and betrayal, as he watched his wife being led away, still hurling accusations and justifications. On the screen, my recorded message continued, addressing my son directly. "Thomas, my beloved son, my heart breaks knowing the pain this revelation will cause you. You were deceived by a master manipulator, someone who targeted you specifically because of your kind and trusting nature. Please know that I never blamed you, not for a moment. My only regret is the suffering you will endure because of what Audrey has done." Tears streamed down Thomas's face as he stared at the screen, visibly struggling to process the shocking truth. The video then delivered its final, unexpected twist. "I want you all to know that despite what Audrey believed, despite what she told everyone, I am not actually dead. With the help of trusted friends and medical professionals, I have escaped her final attempt on my life and am recuperating in a secure location. By the time you see this, Audrey will have revealed her true nature, believing she was finally safe to do so." The funeral home erupted in confused exclamations and questions. Thomas stood up shakily, looking wildly around as if expecting me to walk through the door at any moment. Detective Rollins approached him, speaking quietly and showing him something on his phone. I knew he was seeing the live video feed of me watching the events unfold, proof that I was indeed alive. The screen now showed Harold, who explained the situation calmly to the assembled mourners. He detailed how we had orchestrated the apparent death to catch Audrey, knowing she would feel safe to let her guard down once she believed I was gone. He assured everyone that I was recovering under excellent medical care and would be reunited with my loved ones once it was safe to do so. As the reality of what had happened sank in, the mood in the funeral home transformed from shock and confusion to relief and even some nervous laughter. A funeral had become a celebration of justice and of life continuing despite a murderer's best efforts. Through my video feed, I watched as Thomas left with Detective Rollins, presumably coming to see me. The rest of the mourners gradually dispersed, many staying to speak with the officers to provide statements about Audrey's behavior in recent months. Sarah turned to me, smiling through tears. "You did it, Carolina. You caught her. She will never hurt anyone else again." I nodded, exhausted but triumphant. The evidence was overwhelming, Audrey's public confession damning. She had thought me an easy target, a vulnerable old woman she could silence forever. Instead, she had underestimated the quiet strength of someone determined to protect not just herself, but others who might have become Audrey's future victims. As I waited for Thomas to arrive, I felt a profound sense of vindication. Audrey had believed she was writing the final chapter of my story. Instead, I had rewritten hers, transforming it from a tale of perfect murder to one of justice served. The dead might not speak, but I had refused to be silenced, finding my voice when it mattered most. The weeks following the dramatic events at my funeral were a whirlwind of medical treatments, police interviews, and emotional reunions. Thomas arrived at my secure medical facility less than an hour after leaving the funeral home, his face still bearing the tracks of tears, but his eyes alight with disbelief and joy. When he saw me propped up in my hospital bed, pale but very much alive, he broke down completely. "Mom," he sobbed as he gently embraced me, careful not to disturb the IV lines. "I had no idea. I should have known. I should have protected you." I stroked his hair as I had when he was a child. "You could not have known," I assured him. "Audrey was exceptionally skilled at manipulation. She specifically chose you because of your trusting nature, your goodness." Our reunion was bittersweet. Thomas was overjoyed that I had survived, but devastated by Audrey's betrayal and his own unwitting role in her scheme. In the days that followed, he rarely left my side, sleeping in a chair beside my bed, despite my protests, as if afraid I might disappear if he looked away. As my body slowly purged the toxins Audrey had been administering, my strength gradually returned. The doctors were amazed at my resilience, noting that many patients would not have survived such prolonged poisoning. Dr. Winters attributed my survival to a combination of early intervention once I was hospitalized and what she called my stubborn determination to see justice done. Audrey's case moved swiftly through the legal system, the evidence against her overwhelming. In addition to the video footage, financial records and journal entries, prosecutors had her public confession at the funeral witnessed by dozens of people. Faced with the mountain of evidence, she accepted a plea deal rather than face a trial. She was sentenced to 27 years in prison for attempted murder, elder abuse, financial fraud, and several other charges. The sentencing hearing was another emotional milestone. I insisted on attending in person, wanting Audrey to see me face to face, to know that I had defeated her completely. When I entered the courtroom supported by Thomas and using a walker, Audrey's composure finally broke entirely. Gone was the polished, confident woman who had so methodically plotted my death. In her place sat a defeated figure in an orange jumpsuit, her carefully maintained appearance now reduced to prison simplicity. "Your Honor," I addressed the court before sentencing. "I do not speak today out of hatred or a desire for revenge. I speak for those who cannot, the elderly victims of abuse who never saw justice. Audrey did not just try to take my life. She tried to take my dignity, my voice, and my relationship with my son. The physical poison she administered was matched only by the emotional poison she spread through my family." I asked the court to consider not just what she did to me, but what she might have done to others had she succeeded. The judge commended my courage and noted that the case had already sparked important conversations about elder abuse and the vulnerability of aging populations. The sentence she handed down ensured that Audrey would be well into her 60s before she had any chance of parole. As media attention around the case grew, I found myself reluctantly thrust into the role of advocate. Journalists wanted interviews, elder rights organizations invited me to speak, and law enforcement agencies asked me to help train officers on recognizing signs of elder abuse. Though initially hesitant, I gradually embraced this unexpected platform. 6 months after my near death, once my health had stabilized, I established the Bennett Foundation for Elder Protection, using some of the very funds Audrey had tried to steal. The foundation provided resources for elderly individuals at risk of abuse, funded research into protective measures, and offered legal assistance to victims and their families. My relationship with Thomas required healing of its own kind. Though I never blamed him, he struggled with guilt and self-recrimination. How could he have been so blind to Audrey's true nature? How could he have dismissed my concerns as confusion or paranoia? These questions tormented him. We began attending counseling sessions together, gradually rebuilding the trust and openness that had always characterized our relationship before Audrey entered our lives. It was a slow process, marked by painful conversations and tearful reconciliations. But with each passing month, I saw more of my son returning to me. The most profound lesson I learned through this ordeal was about the quiet power of persistence. I had been systematically isolated, gaslighted, physically weakened, and emotionally undermined. By all calculations, I should have become another tragic statistic, another elderly person whose suspicious death was attributed to natural causes. Yet something within me, some fundamental stubborn streak, had refused to surrender. 1 year to the day after my fake funeral, I held a different kind of gathering at my home, a celebration of life that was genuine rather than performative. Friends, family, former students, and the small circle of allies who had helped me expose Audrey gathered in my garden, which had bloomed beautifully that spring. Standing before them, no longer needing the walker, I shared what I had come to understand through my ordeal. There is a special kind of strength that comes only when you have nothing left to lose, I told them. When Audrey thought she was stripping away everything that mattered to me, my health, my independence, my relationship with my son, even my life itself, she actually gave me the ultimate freedom. The freedom to fight without fear because I had already faced the worst that could happen. I looked around at the faces, watching me at Thomas, standing tall beside me at the community that had rallied around us in recovery. I learned that justice does not always come in the ways we expect, I continued. Sometimes it requires us to be creative, to be patient, to play the long game. Audrey thought that once I was gone, her secrets would be buried with me. She never considered that I might find a way to speak from beyond what she thought was my grave. But perhaps the most important lesson I discovered is about trust. Audrey exploited trust, used it as a weapon against us. For a time, I feared I would never fully trust again. But I have come to understand that trust is not something to be abandoned because it can be betrayed. Rather, it must be given wisely, earned continually, and valued for the precious thing it is. The gathering that day marked not just my survival, but my renewal. At 68 years old, I had been given an unexpected second chapter, one I intended to fill with purpose and meaning. The woman who had entered that hospital room a year earlier, weak and frightened but determined, had emerged transformed, not just physically healed, but spiritually strengthened. In the years that followed, I watched with pride as the foundation grew, helping hundreds of vulnerable elderly individuals escape or avoid abusive situations. I testified before state legislators advocating for stronger protections and harsher penalties for elder abuse. I even co-authored a book about my experience, which became an unexpected bestseller and further spread awareness about the often invisible crime of elder exploitation. Thomas eventually found love again, this time with Sarah the nurse, who had first believed me and helped set my plan in motion. Their relationship, built on genuine care and integrity, was everything his marriage to Audrey had not been. When they had their first child, a daughter they named Georgia, after my late husband, I felt the circle of healing complete. Now, as I approach my 73rd birthday, I look back on the ordeal not with bitterness, but with a sense of purpose fulfilled. What Audrey intended as my end became instead a beginning not just for me, but for the many others who have been protected because of what we exposed. To those of you watching who may be facing your own battles, whether against abuse, betrayal, or simply the challenges that come with aging, I want you to remember this. Your voice matters. Your story deserves to be told. And sometimes justice comes in the most unexpected ways at the most unexpected times. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who thought you were too weak or too old to fight back? Share your story in the comments. And if this account has helped you recognize the signs of elder abuse, or inspired you to check on a vulnerable loved one, please subscribe to support more stories that might save lives. Remember to like and share this video to spread awareness about elder abuse. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to speak your truth, no matter who tries to silence you. The truth cannot remain buried forever. Even the dead find ways to speak when justice demands it.